Hi, I'm just going to wait for a few minutes. I logged on just a little bit early and I'm very excited about this. Super excited. I'm going to put up the first slide and just wait for a couple minutes for people to join and then we'll get started. Good morning. Oh, I'm so excited to be giving this talk. It is now 10 o'clock. We've got people in the room. So excited to be here. I would love to keep this a bit interactive. There's a way that you can raise your hand to talk, or if you want to type things in the chat box. This is a really super fun topic, so let's have some fun with it. After the webinar, I'll send out continuing education credits. If you're a dietitian, you can just log those. If you're another profession that needs continuing education, you can check with your local certifying agency to see whether this is going to count or how to make that happen. So, hi, so excited to start. I feel like I should ask if you can hear me just because it's part of how these things go these days. All right, so cults and psychological manipulation, the historic role of nutrition and mind control, and I'm Yaffi. Hi. Okay, so disclosures. Well, I own the platform, so thanks for being here. I don't have any other disclosures, no conflicts. We will talk about whether or not I am myself a cult member. Stay tuned. All right, learning objectives. I really do have more learning objectives, but I feel like, does anyone really pay attention to the slide anyway? Okay, understand the role of nutrition and health. Name 3 nutrients that when withheld or limited affect the mental state of the patient or client. Explain how to differentiate a cult from a non-threatening group. And also I'm gonna add their vocabulary around new religions movements and how to discuss these concepts in a compassionate way and in a way that is effective to the person whom you're trying to affect. That's me. This paragraph is just my background and says that I am up to no good. And you know that because you signed up for this webinar. I have Toddler Test Kitchen. I'm on Instagram, well, toddler.testkitchen, but that's probably changing today to Yaffi Lvova Nutrition. I have an Amazon authors page where I write not about cults, but about the family feeding dynamic. And I'm on Facebook at Baby Boom Nutrition, and I have Naptime Nutrition, which is my YouTube and podcast. So super fun. And I'm doing this. If you're here and you have a webinar you would like, something you'd like to learn about, you want me to create something, I want to hear about it. And if there's a study that you've been interested in, I want to rip it apart in Journal Club. So contact me. I'm here for that. These are books I wrote. Some of them are continuing education and some of them are for popular culture. So The two on the top right, Beyond a Bite, there's the professional edition and the parent edition. Those are ideally used in tandem. I'm very excited about those two. They're for eating and neurodiversity. All right, let's jump in. Be afraid, be very afraid, or not. Okay, so let's start off with the definition of cult. And I'm going to be upfront and say that in advertising this webinar, I did receive some hate for my use of the word cult. And I responded saying, you underrate me. Because I know, I know, this is a really hard, this is a four-letter word. And it's used as a four-letter word in journalism, in studies of religions. Because when we classify things as a cult, it has power. We use that like for conversation, but that word really does have some negative effects, practical negative effects. So it's good to be aware of the vocabulary we use. And that's a theme these days in social justice. We want to be compassionate. We want to think about the words that we use and how they affect people around us. So cult, just straight up Oxford Language Dictionary, a system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object. That could apply to any set of beliefs, really. Okay, a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. Well, what does it matter what other people think? A misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing. I don't know, I like Oreos a whole lot. Okay, anyway, that's your definition of cult. So be afraid, be very afraid. My name is Yaffi and I am a cult member. No, I'm not, but I have been called a cult member. I've been called a fundamentalist cult member because of my association with a particular sect of Judaism that people sometimes find uncomfortable. And because they find it uncomfortable, it has been labeled as a cult, and I have been called that. So as far as vocabulary is used, yeah, I'm pretty on top of that. Yeah, sometimes people just throw around that word in order to have a particular effect on you. And this is not a good way to go. So I'm going to discourage calling things cults in general. All right, what is a cult anyway? The preferred term is new religions movement. A new religion. Generally, they were started around or after the 1900s. I've got a picture here of the burned over district in New York. And this is a fascinating area where a lot of different religions started. Many of them have been labeled cults. So just for our list here, religions that started in this area: Latter-day Saints, Millerites, Seventh-day Adventists, the Fox Sisters, super interesting story, the Social Gospel, Ebenezer Colonies, and Utopian Experiments. Also the Shakers. My favorite cult from the burned over district is the Oneida group. Have you heard of Oneida? Raise of hands. If you're thinking about silverware, you are on the right track. The Oneida group was started by this guy on the right who looks completely like my brother, almost exactly, super weird, John Humphrey Noyes. And he got kicked out of minister school because, well, he had some pretty strong ideas that did not jibe with what they were teaching. And he started, it wasn't called Oneida at the beginning. They took on the name Oneida when they moved to Oneida, New York. And this group was using the Vogue of Community plate, the left picture there, that silverware. That was how they made money. The fascinating thing about this group is that it was completely unique in that when they realized that the religion aspect of the group was not working out, they ditched it and became a company. And they continued to operate as a financially responsible company for many decades before it was sold. So now Oneida is owned by a different company. It's not owned by this former group. And yet I will pretty much only buy Oneida silverware because I want to giggle every time I open the drawer. His religion was based in Christianity, but as we see with many leaders, he started to develop his own takes on it. He did not consider himself a second coming, much like some of the other leaders we're going to discuss, but he did decide to change some biblical rules, such as marriage was all of a sudden not between two people. It was between as many people as you wanted. They still did classify this as Christianity, which I think would be an interesting conversation with other more mainstream forms. But this was really fascinating. There's a lot of literature on it. So New Religions Movement, why vocabulary matters. Well, here's the thing. If you're talking about a cult or a new religions movement, why are you using that term? What's your goal here? Are you trying to help someone escape? Because if you're trying to help someone who is in a situation where they have no choices under a very charismatic leader, calling it names is not going to help. So it's not going to foster proper escape. It's not going to foster appropriate treatment for the person who's trying to overcome their experience in this group. We know as dietitians, we've got to meet people where they are. We're not just going to show an ideal view and say, you have to live up to this ideal view. That kind of sounds like what a charismatic leader would do. So instead, we have to use compassionate vocabulary in general when we're talking to people. We need to listen to what's important to them, to what their values are, to what their goals are, and we need to follow that. And in the email after with this continuing education cert, I'm going to send out the PowerPoint. And this, I mentioned at the beginning, I got some hate. So this was actually a resource that was dropped by the person giving me the hate. This one more on this right here. It's a great resource. It really is. It has a lot of information about new religions movements. It's got an amazing resource list, all kinds of videos and books and articles that you can read. So I'm including it. It is a great resource. All right, this was an interesting one, imposed anorexia. This was a term that was coined by Jesse Milkey, and I will get into that particular article that was written. But imposed anorexia is the idea of an eating disorder that has been imposed because of religious or religious-like views. It's the link between diet and social control. And imposed anorexia is going to look very different than anorexia nervosa or the type of anorexia that might come with certain wasting diseases. This is when group leadership is using food to control members. And we see this a lot in these groups. I had a wealth of information to mine for this talk. Selected leaders of ideological groups and new religious movements use dietary restrictions to regulate members' bodies and minds in much the same manner as anorectics use dietary restrictions to govern their lives. That's imposed anorexia. That is a leader using the body of followers and imposing eating disorders on that body. And it's interesting using that word body because it really highlights the parallel that not only are they doing this to their body, and likely they are not doing it to their own body, but they are treating their followers as an extension of their body and imposing anorexia. So this is an attempt to control the self through rigid food choices. The self, or if it's from a leader, to control the group. High commitment ideological groups use it to subjugate their body of followers on a few different ways. There is an angle of direct malnutrition leading to health conditions that leave you more mentally weak. There are also issues of just the very issue of control and taking the control for something as basic as food away from the follower and the kind of dynamic that introduces. I felt powerful as an anorexic. Controlling my body yielded an illusion of control over my life. I had reduced my world to a plate of steamed carrots, and over this tiny kingdom, I proudly crowned myself queen. This explains that this quote is why people fall into excessive body control on their own. And if you looked at this, creating a tiny kingdom over which you are the royalty, that's what's going on in charismatic groups. So anorexia nervosa, there's a biomedical model, there's a sociocultural feminist model, and there's a social psychological model, all leading to the eating disorder of anorexia nervosa. The biomedical model is rooted completely in physical. The socioculture is only in, well, socioculture, it's a culture bound. It is entirely mental and not physical at all. So these two, and this is extremely dated, we are rooted in the overwhelm of womanhood. Oh, we're so weak that this is our answer for the overwhelm of womanhood. It's so much more complicated than that. It's so much more complex. So the social psychological model explains the desire for complete control of the body in opposition to the desire to be complacent and obedient. It's an effort to take control over the body. And in a group situation, it's an effort for a leader to take control over the group. Directly imposed anorexia is when a group leader gives orders or commands. You are not allowed to eat this. You are not allowed to eat that. Doctrinally accepted means that the group has rules, and those are just stated rules, and you follow them. And then mediated is when the group leader gives instructions through another person. And these are all different ways that someone who's in a leadership position could affect their their food intake, but also any other thing. I mean, these are the three ways that a charismatic leader can control and subjugate followers. Okay, so our first case study, the Remnant Fellowship. Oh man, the Gwen Shamblin divine disaster. Okay, so have you heard of this? I considered putting a picture of her on the slide, but her hair didn't fit. So she was a registered dietitian. Oh, Gwen, why? This whole thing is very fascinating. If you're here at Weight Inclusive Network, you're probably familiar with intuitive eating. So hold on to your seats. This is going to get twisted. So this is the Remnant Fellowship, The Way Down. There's a documentary on Netflix. There's a different one on HBO. This is a weight loss plan with very strict Christian theology. And I want to say here that this is the first time that Christianity has come up in this talk. It won't be the last, but I want to be very, very clear that any religion that is taken by a leader and twisted can have the same vocabulary as something that is more mainstream while also completely not representing it. I do not want to associate what she was doing with Christianity in general, because Christianity is huge and a lot of people are doing a lot of different things. And most people involved in Christianity are not doing this. This is an intentionally twisted way to understand scripture and should not be associated with more mainstream churches where people go to find comfort and connection. So she based it on Christian theology. Her idea was praying away the weight by understanding the difference between emotional eating and physical hunger. So that sounds, well, the second part anyway, sounds pretty reasonable. You can change your relationship with food by looking to God for fulfillment rather than the pantry. She wasn't saying to feel hungry and reach for God instead, but she was saying, listen to your body. If your stomach isn't growling, you're not hungry and there's no reason to eat. This was actually seen as a take on intuitive eating. Intuitive eating came out in 1985 and, Gwen, 1986. So this was very much based on intuitive eating concepts, but it was taken a very different direction. Intuitive eating is meant to be a guideline so that you can, self-examine and decide what your body wants and decide what to do with that. This was very much prescriptive. Your body is saying this. Shamblin doesn't believe that it's a sin to leave food on your plate, and she points to a passage from Exodus in which God prevents the Israelites from hoarding manna by turning it into maggots. And this is evidence that saving leftovers indicates an insufficient trust that the Lord will provide all things. Don't save your leftovers because God does not want you to. Being skinny is how you show devotion to God. So none of this sounds remotely like intuitive eating at this point. There were extremely traditional gender roles, which some people do find comforting, and other people are not going to find comfortable. Children are to be seen and not heard. The belt was encouraged. I'm not going to get too into that because there's no need. There was a murder charge. There is a husband and wife who are spending time in jail for murdering their 9-year-old. And part of the court case was tapes of Gwen telling them how to parent, and that parenting resulted in the child's death. She was taking an extremely hard biblical line and taking biblical verses and using them in an extremely prescriptive way that don't necessarily resonate with the comfort and connection for which you might turn to religion. So divine dieting. This is a full quote from a friend of mine, Gigi Berman. We've got some Hebrew in there, so I'll have to explain. A cookie is a sin, and exercise and hunger are its atonement. Hunger is evil, and the more we distance ourselves from it, the holier we become. Sugar and carbs are tempests, and it is our duty to shun them. We forget that food is the mashal. We get stuck equating our moral standing with how much cake we eat and how much we weigh. Pleasure exists so that we can have the free will to reject it. Those of a strong will restrict calories. Those who are weak become slaves to their appetites. What she's saying here is she's explaining the perspective from this charismatic leader and the type of information that they would be giving over. The body is here to be railed against. The body is here to be submitted. So food is the mashal. It's something positive. It doesn't need to be the center of the drama. You can read that full article at the link on the bottom, and I'll send that as well. It's really great. The overall article was just talking about how clergy needs to not use diet references in religious talks. Okay, next case study, Heaven's Gate. So much fun. Members work to strip themselves of human shortcomings. They kind of saw themselves as robots in human bodies. So this is an example menu. Monday, this is an example menu from the end of their diet adventure. I'm going to circle back to the beginning. Monday, breakfast, hot cereal with raisins, bread. Midday, salad, Swedish meatballs, mashed potatoes, corn, rolls, iced tea. Evening, meat sandwich, pickle, chips, drink. This sounds pretty good. I mean, this might be on, aside from meat at 2 meals, this might be on my, on my menu, you know? But the goal was utilitarianism. And that came down to kind of portion sizes. Food is supposed to be just serving you to keep you standing upright so that you don't die. A juice-only diet was used for weeks at a time to strip down the body's childish and self-centered ways of looking at food, nutrition, and what a brain feel it needs to make it feel satisfied. Yeah, this is describing how food is only there to make you feel good. We don't actually need it. But in the end, moderation in small amounts of meat, chicken, and lots of vegetables and grains was key. It provided a balance that could supply us with the energy to work at our regular jobs while supplying the mental alertness to keep our focus and direction. I feel like this is the best thing in the whole talk. This is recognition that balance leads to focus and direction, and that balance comes from a variety of foods. Yes, they did arrive at this conclusion after trying a lot of different diets. They went from diet to diet to figure out what works, and they landed on balance. It's a good story. You know, and then they drank the Flavor Aid. Ooh. All right, on to Nexium. I know you've heard of this one. So much attention lately. This started as a self-help, multi-level marketing scheme. These were talks that you'd go to in order to feel stronger and be able to take control of your life and be able to get over some of the hurts from your childhood. And people really did benefit. And much like Oneida and other groups, once a leader starts to see their power, they start to really hold on to it. One of the most popular pieces of knowledge about Nexium is their diet, which is often called the sex diet. It's 800 calories a day. They had to record everything, and cheating was punishable. Given what was going on in this group, that word punishable is very scary. They had branding going on, and that wasn't punishment. That was just being together as a group and forming bonds as a group. I'm not sure what punishment really meant, but if branding was their idea of fun, I'm not sure I want to know. So when prosecutors asked Nicole how long India was on a 500 calorie a day diet, Nicole answered, the entire time I knew her, which was almost a year. So although the regular diet was 800 calories a day, vastly undercutting what would be normally recommended, some followers were pushed into a 500 calorie per day diet. I was told I was on a diet to build discipline, improve character, and improve my ability to be precise. There's a video interview there that you can click on, someone just referring back. She had to ask for food, but it wasn't even just food. She had to ask for permission to eat as, Master, may I have 100 calories? We have this movement in intuitive eating and in anti-diet in general to refer to food as food, to not call food poison or junk, to call it what it is, to call it, it's an apple, it's a banana, it's a cookie, it's a cupcake, it's an entire 3-level sheet cake that I am about to face dive into. But it's not referred to as an amount of calories. Referring to it as an amount of calories really drives home a different message about the purpose of food and the utilitarian aspect that they were trying to push. There were lots of green vegetables, no meat, a powerful way to live one's ethics in a measurable way. Wow. If you have a checklist of your diet in front of you, those are ways that you can prove that you're living up to your values. Limiting basic food intake shows you're not swayed by the base urges of the body, that even hunger has no power over you. Right, because the body's signals are seen as evil and base and something to be overcome. Now, getting back to this, lots of green vegetables. Great, yay, eat plants. They do have protein. But what you see in a lot of these groups is specifically a limiting of protein. And here we've got no meat. Lots of green vegetables. It may not have been balanced for protein. Beans are not green vegetables. Did they have significant sources of protein? And how did that affect their mental strength? Oh, Ramabhara, disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ. Again, completely not associated with mainstream Christianity. And now, I put that in a slide. I'll get to it. Oy vey. This meant no food whatsoever during the term of the fast. Initially, fruit juices were allowed. Some of the brethren then took to drinking large amounts of fruit juices. When Rama heard of this, he prescribed fruit juices too. Being that we had no money to buy juice in the first place, we went without nourishment of any kind for 3 days. I would often keel over and black out. This was ascribed to a demonic attack. He was starving his followers and then calling it a demonic attack if they passed out. He enforced group binging on weekends. So it was starvation during the week and then binging on weekends. It was mostly focused on Indian food, which was his background. But what would happen is if his followers did not eat all of the food, he would let it sit for the entire week that they were fasting and then serve it to them again, which of course resulted in mass sickness. If food came back up, followers were forced to reconsume it. Other awful things too, not mentioning all the things. I don't think you should Google him. Bahara himself had very high standards for his own food. He had a walk-in fridge that was very nicely stocked, paid for by the group. This is him now. His name is now Avraham Cohen. It's no good news. It hasn't turned into anything better. Don't talk to this guy. Another quote from a follower. Another deprivation I went through was food, or rather lack of control of food. So here you have at the very beginning of this quote, it's not only the food, it's the lack of control. Those are two different aspects. Rama would make us fast all weekend, then stuff us with more than we could handle in one meal. We would work all day, then go to another meeting, and then work some more. Finally, Rama would feed us breakfast, lunch, and supper all at one meal. He would give us 3 quart-sized bowls of soups to shove down our throats. At first it was great, but soon we became stuffed. Yet we still had to keep eating whatever was left in our bowls. Not only that, but we also had to finish off a loaf of bread along with that. So this is a picture of extreme control, fasting, and then force feeding. On to the next one. Elizabeth Clare Prophet. I have a suspicion that was not her birth last name. Elizabeth Clare Prophet of the Church Universal and Triumphant. She was channeling messages from Jesus and the Buddha. Again, not associated with either of those. Prophet gave her followers direct orders about what they should eat, how they should eat, and even where they should sit while eating. And this is again from the article from Jessie Milky, which is a fantastic article. The seating arrangements were really fascinating because families would sit as families, but she had really strong ideas over who should sit where. It was extremely elaborate and ritualized, which is also something that you find with eating disorders that individuals have. They have ritualizations around food. They were extremely highly controlled familial meals, which was meant to weaken the familial social bonds. It's interesting how she would position parents in certain places and children in certain places in order to specifically disrupt bonds. I mean, that's a very high level of manipulation. Group members subsisted mainly on rice and vegetables. Again, we have a very limited protein here. While Elizabeth herself owned a lovely, fully stocked kitchen. I feel like I said that a couple of slides ago. Okay, we got a couple short ones here. Sun Myung Moon, the Moonies, Unification Church from the 1950s. Suffer for God mentality. Some people would go on a fast for a week. There was a lot going on with this. The picture here is a picture from one of their ceremonies, actually relatively recently, where the leadership was passed from Moon down to his youngest son. Synanon, which was also supposed to be a self-help situation. They banned cigarettes and sugar, shaved everybody's heads. They had a real interesting diet that was based on, it was actually a big company. And so they had some corporate sponsors, such as Grape Nuts, Uncle Sam's cereal, and a brand company. So that's what they would eat. They basically ate their corporate sponsorships. Although they lived on a dairy farm, they only drank cinnamon milk, which was dried milk that was lower in nutrition than the milk from the cows that they were taking care of and milking and selling. Okay, so back to just extreme caloric restriction in the body. What happens to the body when this is going on? This is from Ellie Eberhardt, RD. She's one of the dietitians who's on Eat Cake Pod, the podcast. Great, she said that this was the weirdest interview she did. She didn't have an opportunity to talk with me directly, so I pulled some quotes from this article. So 800 calories a day is low enough that basic survival mechanisms start to kick in. When you start, I was interviewed for an article yesterday, actually, and we were talking about how you can train your body to not feel hunger and how that's actually a mechanism of starvation, not a good thing. Yeah, I don't need breakfast anymore. It's not because I don't need breakfast, my body doesn't need breakfast. It's because I haven't been giving my body breakfast long enough that it stopped asking for it. Do I need a different amount of calories per day? No, my body still needs the same baseline amount of calories to function. When someone restricts their carbohydrate intake, that essentially is restricting their glucose, and glucose is the only fuel for our brain. Don't eat that, it'll turn into sugar. I hope so. That's how digestion works. Hormone function, mood stabilization, and general cognitive functioning are downregulated. When you don't have enough nutrition and your body is going into starvation, it will focus on survival. And that means not thinking at a high level, because thinking is not what's going to have us escape from the bear we're running from. They're not able to necessarily always make rational decisions, which is one of the pieces that makes an eating disorder so challenging for loved ones as well. because they see a loved one greatly impacting their health and seemingly unable to make changes, which might seem simple. Can't you see this charismatic leader is saying crazy things and ruining your life? No, they're not eating enough to see that. There are definitely cognitive impacts to someone who is being calorically restricted. This also comes up when we talk about pediatric nutrition, particularly with the new AAP recommendations that dieting and pills and diet surgery be used on children. When we think about sending them into puberty with a lower possible caloric intake, we're talking about the same cognitive impacts. It doesn't matter whether you are restricting in order to lose weight, if you've had surgery and you can't eat because of it, or whether you have an outright eating disorder, or even if you don't have access to food. It doesn't matter the cause. The result is that you're not eating enough, and there will be cognitive impacts. Some of those cognitive impacts could be permanent based on the length of that time and the developmental stage at which it happens. So why? Why do people do this? Why? If you want a talk on why people follow ancient traditions, like I do have a talk with Dua Al-Dasuki. We talk about Judaism and Islam and supporting your religious client. And we do talk about why people make the choices to belong to, well, more mainstream religious groups. We do talk about Islam and Judaism, and you blow it into other areas. So Ori Tavor is a speaker on this subject, and he says, it gives the believer a sense of control over their own destiny. I'm only going to eat these types of food. I'm going to abstain from that type of food, but it also allows the group to control the individual. It's like clothes. It's identification. Why is a certain type of clothing or hairstyle such an integral part of religious identity? Why do I dress like I do? Because it's a very easy marker to demarcate an in-group and differentiate themselves from the outsiders. And I'm going to say that I dress the way I do, and my choices, I dress as an Orthodox Jew, partially so that other people recognize me as such, so that if I'm at the airport and there's someone else who's there, I'm recognizable as part of my culture, and that provides some amount of comfort when meeting a new person. And yeah, that sometimes comes with some hate too, and that's something that I'm willing to take on. But that's the same type of angle that these people are going for, but with a different flavor. Doing things that are different, but together, brings that cohesiveness, that brings comfort and a feeling of belonging. Sometimes that can be healthy, and sometimes it really cannot be healthy. Sarah Berman, reporter for Vice Canada, says that culty camaraderie that came with enduring the same challenge was an important aspect. It's that we are going through this really awful hard thing together, and that bonds us and brings us happy, good feelings. The concern is that the harshest sanction of all is internal. The devoted member's inner capacity to control urges, desires, actions, thoughts, and beliefs, contrary to the group's teaching. Self-condemnation is everyday fare. The individual eventually becomes his own source of constraint by taking on restriction after restriction after restriction. This quote was given regarding the diets of Heaven's Gate and the Democratic Workers' Party, but was also extended to the breatharians, which is a group that determined that the human body doesn't need food. We are past a developmental point where we need food. We can live off of air. And we know that because the components in air are the same components as the building blocks of our body, and therefore everything we need is in air, and we don't need food at all. I mean, I'm a dietitian talking to other health professionals. I feel like I don't have to talk about why that's not based in evidence. Why do people join? They can join from maybe their own choices or environmental manipulation or psychological susceptibility. There are all kinds of reasons people join groups. Here are a couple of interesting books. The Making of a Moonie, Brainwashing or Choice. That one's from the mid-'80s. So I think it would be interesting to read both of these and compare them. The Language of Fanaticism, Cultish, that came out last year. So that's why it would be super fun to kind of contrast these books and see how they're similar and how they're different. So pulling out a larger view, okay, macronutrients and mental health. Eat. It's food, eat it. I feel like this is my job as a dietitian to just be like, it's food, eat it. No, put it in your mouth. Just, no, eat the food, it's okay. You need protein, you need fat. You need carbs, the brain functions off of glucose. Restricting any of those is going to end badly as far as mental health. There is a certain baseline nutrition you need to function. So micronutrients, vitamin D, B12, omega-3 fatty acids, flavonoids, all of these are associated with mental health. And when they're taken away, when they're drastically reduced, we don't have that mental health. We don't have that mental strength that we would otherwise have. So this is a fun picture. I'm going to blow out each of these pieces to talk about them individually, and the sources at the bottom of the slide. Okay, so this one is magnesium. Magnesium is essential for muscle and nerve function, as well as energy production. Deficiencies are correlated with depression, anxiety, OCD, schizophrenia, eating disorder, and ADHD. Magnesium is found in vegetables. EPA and DHA for cognitive functioning. This is a good one. Deficiencies are correlated with ADHD, depression, heart disease, rheumatoid arthritis, hot flashes during menopause, lung and kidney diseases, type 2 diabetes, irritable bowel disease, anorexia nervosa, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, early stages of colorectal cancer, and Alzheimer's. So while a lot of that was physical in nature, you do see a lot of mental as well. Folate. Deficiencies are correlated with megaloblastic and microcytic anemia, cognitive performance, elevated homocysteine, which causes other issues, and compromised immune system. And alpha tocopherol, which is a form of vitamin E. Deficiencies are correlated with immune function. Both innate and adaptive immune function are impaired with lack of vitamin E. And also the vitamin E is important for blood clotting. There are a lot of other issues that I didn't list everything. It would have been exhausting to list everything. Well, exhaustive is exhausting. And I know that you can't read this chart. I put the source below. But these are the tested molecules, disorders associated with them, the study design, number of participants, main results, and the references. This was just a fascinating chart that just looked at all the research associating macro and micronutrients with health effects, a lot of them mental. Veganism and vegetarianism are associated with increased depression and anxiety. Yes, I do think that you can be a healthy vegetarian. I don't think these groups are encouraging healthy vegetarianism. And that's probably where you're going to see the increased depression and anxiety. Impact of nutrients on mental health and well-being. That's a good thing to look into. So there's a source for you as well. Breaking it down. All right, so here's where we're going to get into some mainstream stuff and talk about the difference. The difference between halal, kosher, and all of this control. Okay, number one, does the prescriptive diet allow the person to eat enough food to survive? If we're looking at halal and kosher, we're looking at eliminating individual foods, not whole food groups. Not having bacon doesn't mean you can't have meat. And being careful with washing your vegetables because of bugs doesn't mean you can't have vegetables. There are not whole food groups eliminated with mainstream religious diets. Does it moralize food? Are you a bad person for eating that? Here's the thing. If I were to go to McDonald's right now and eat a double bacon cheeseburger, it wouldn't make me a bad person according to my faith. It's not something I'm supposed to do, but it doesn't make me a bad person. It's not moralized. Does it use food to communicate with God or a higher power? So that's a good thing. Are you using food to communicate with God or higher power, however you define that? Or are you using it to control yourself? Or are you using it to be controlled? Those are big questions. The American health food industry has roots in 60s counterculture embrace of new religious movements. I love that. If you think back to the 60s and all of the new religious movements that were coming out in the 60s and 70s, and you think about that and that passion, the same way we look at diet culture now. It's like people are picking diets as their religion. Devotees started brands, shops started selling the preferred varieties of grub. This historical melding of food and faith can be seen in the moralizing way we still talk about nutrition, with foods labeled good or bad, natural, unnatural, or clean. There's a book, I think it's called Hippie Food, and fascinating read. I loved it. I loved reading about how people used to try to make their own tofu so that I could just, skip over to the store and buy tofu. Individuals who observe codified food rules make a public demonstration of belonging to a group and every day provide themselves with private affirmation of identification with the group. In this way, a sense of belonging is constantly reinforced. Okay, that's a general statement, okay? You follow codified food rules, and that's a public statement. That could be a healthy thing, or it could be an unhealthy thing. One way to cut down on eating disorders is to not go on a diet. I loved this. Her response was, every time someone says, oh, I'm on this diet, and that has somebody's name attached to it, I say, that's not healthy. You could develop an eating disorder. Oh, that'll shut down a conversation pretty nicely, huh? Okay, so signs of a problematic situation. How do you know whether you're in a problematic situation or whether you're just having fun with some awesome neighbors who like drinking a lot of fruit juice? Communication with non-believers was discouraged. Members were not allowed to leave without fear of reprisal. If you're not allowed to leave, that's a problem. If you're encouraged to cut off communication with people who don't belong to that group, that's a problem. This was taken from culteducation.com. This guy, I've forgotten his name at the moment, but he's very involved in helping people escape from situations where their life has been controlled by an outside force. So these are warning signs of a potentially unsafe group or group leader. And while I read these, think about some groups that you know and contrast it in your head. Absolute authoritarianism without meaningful accountability. No tolerance for questions or critical inquiry. No meaningful financial disclosure. Unreasonable fear about the outside world. No legitimate reason to leave. You're not allowed to leave. Former followers are always in the wrong, negative, or evil. Former members relate the same stories of abuse. There are records, books, news articles, and other documented cases of abuse in the group. Followers feel they can never be good enough. The group leader is always right. The group or leader is the exclusive means of knowing the truth. There is no truth other than through that group or leader. So here's the upshot. Eat the food. It's food. Eat it. Put it in your mouth. Chew. Swallow. Thank you, your friendly neighborhood dietitian. Okay, opening it up for questions. Yeah, there's a thing where you can request to speak. I'm not sure how it shows up on your side, but if you got anything to say, anything to add, any questions, either hit it up in the chat box or raise your hand to speak. And while I wait for questions to come in, I'm going to tell you about upcoming events. So I've got a journal club coming up. I do not have an article for it. So if you have any kind of study that you've been thinking, hey, I really want to rip this apart, let me know. I am happy to rip it apart for you. Westernization of nutrition, how Western supremacy and dietetic care impacts mental health of BIPOC and immigrant communities. This is going to be fascinating. This is going to be amazing. This talk is the reason I started the platform. I pitched this talk to a major organization and they said it was not a topic of interest. It is a topic of interest. So I've got the amazing Fatima and Brianna, a therapist and a dietitian, coming to present on this topic, and it's going to be amazing. Also coming up, why weight loss doesn't cure diabetes. understanding how weight inclusivity helps clients with or at risk of diabetes. And just like we talked about compassionate language in this talk, MeGrid is really going to be focusing on health at every size and intuitive eating, anti-diet, all of the vocabulary, and talk about what they all mean. What does it mean to be inclusive? What does it look like? And beyond individual behaviors, the role of social determinants of health for the Latin community by the wonderful Isabel. So excited about that. Okay, any questions coming in? No one said anything. I'm going to be emailing the CEU certificates along with a PDF of the slides that's going to have all the clicky links on it. This was super fun to put together and super fun to give. And if you loved it, definitely tell people. There's going to be a recording available this afternoon, and the continuing education will be available soon. So look for your email for the continuing education and the slides. Sign up for more stuff. Yay! Tell some friends, and thank you so much for being here. I don't have any comments or questions, so I'm going to close out the presentation now, but thank you so much for coming. It means everything to me that you're here supporting my my adventures. This is so much fun. Thanks.